Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate you out there in video land. We're going to start off today talking about government versus market provision of a good or service. And we'll use an education system example. So we'll talk about a particular type of school and how that would be supplied and demanded under different conditions. Well, there are just two ways to decide what to produce, how to produce it, where to produce it, and who's going to get it. Of course, thankfully, the one way that's used the most often, probably mostly by default, is the price system. In other words, somebody decides to produce something, hoping that customers will come to buy it, and the market will decide ultimately at what price those transactions will occur. And then if that price is high enough, then the business stays in business. If it's not low enough, then the person says, I think I'm going to do something else for a living. And then the other way that pops up occasionally, disastrously, is provision by command. Usually that's called central planning. Some countries still do that. North Korea, Cuba, former Soviet Union, Red China when it was more red than it is now. And as you know from stories that you may have heard, you may want to Google one of these days, Korea at night. It's an interesting video. It shows the northern half of Korea at night, basically black. And the southern part of Korea, which is a market economy where the price system decides what, how, and for whom, is lit up like a Christmas tree. It shows in one basic picture the difference between these two ways of providing things. And one of the reasons that we're going to use an education example for this today is because within our country and most countries, the schools, both public and private, are basically decided that what is going to be taught, how it's going to be taught, where it's going to be taught, and who's going to have access to it is basically decided mostly by a command system, by a central planning system. And we need to have a way to think about how it might be different if we did it the way the rest of the economy does it, namely through a price system. And let's just talk about how that basically works. And I have my graph up here already. You can ignore that for the moment. Maybe I should take my easel down so you won't be distracted by it. I'll put it back up in a minute. So what happens in this process is that somebody gets an idea. They discover, or they think they discover, that, wow, if I did something a certain way, like provided a certain type of school, I bet a bunch of people would want to enroll in it, and I bet they would pay enough so that the school would be viable. Maybe they would pay enough even to have me make a fantastic profit in the process. All right, so this person with this idea or this discovery goes out and tries to find some money to start his or her school. And let's, for the sake of our example today, let's assume they find the money. And then they do their due diligence, which means they do all the investigation that there is on who might be willing to go to the school and pay how much to go there. And they decide to build a school that's going to teach things, subjects, math, reading, writing, through a sports theme. Okay, not athletics, but a sports theme. This is just our example today. The hypothetical entrepreneur in this example could actually choose to build a school with an athletics theme. And we'll just use this as an example because I've used it frequently. And so they find enough money to build a school with 200 seats. And they start advertising, said, here it is, please enroll in my school. And sure enough, they find 200 customers willing to pay $8,000 for the tuition for the year. For now, let's just assume this is a private school and it's on its own, like in our current system. It's not going to get any government money. It's got to fully fund itself by private tuition. So it turns out in this example that this idea was a great idea. That $8,000 per student was more than enough to pay the bills at the school, and other schooling operators or potential school operators who were, that was a pretty good idea there. They found enough customers at $8,000 a pop to finance their school, and they're making a pretty hefty profit. I can do the same thing. Wow, I can get on in on this action. Okay, and see, that's where my graph comes in. Okay, so what we have here is the supply of the seats in a sports-themed school. I'm going to go over this with my finger because I discovered in my warm-up that these numbers are a little bit small and a little harder to see. Live and learn. We'll make them bigger next time. And I'll go forward today. Okay, so this is the initial supply of the school, of the seats in a sports-themed school that this entrepreneur, through his or her due diligence, says, okay, this is going to be my supply line. And at a price of $8,000, if I can get that much, I'll be able to supply 200 seats. Okay, and they're lucky that the demand is enough so that they can. Okay, so that at a price of $8,000 a seat for a year, they can find enough willing buyers to sell all of the 200 seats that they have available. And it turns out later on they'll discover what the whole demand line looks like. But right now the entrepreneurs discovered, there's a point on the demand line that causes the quantity demanded to be 200 at a price of 8,000. Okay, so anyway, we're back to our story with the other schooling operators noticing how much money that this person is making with their idea to provide schooling with a sports theme. And again, what does that mean? That means they're going to teach reading by reading sports stuff about sports. They're going to teach writing by writing about sports. They're going to teach math by figuring batting averages and on-base percentage, and I don't know why I'm thinking of just baseball examples, but they'll teach math and statistics by doing that. And as some of you are thinking, wow, that's a terrible school. I'd never go to that. But some of the rest of you are thinking, whoa, and maybe if you had a child, my little boy and little girl, they'd go berserk going to school. They would practically beat the door down wanting to go to school every morning because they're little sports nuts. Okay, so obviously this has to be a school of choice, right? Because they're going to be people in both categories. One's going to go, yuck, sports. I get to go to school and learn about sports all day. And others will be crazy about it. So anyway, that's why this is going to be a private school, a school of choice. You can enroll in it if you want to. You don't have to. And ultimately, if we introduce subsidy that's portable between public and private schools, then some people will want to use their subsidy to attend the sports themed school, and others say, no, that wouldn't work for my child. Okay, so we're back to our initial supply line, okay, and we're with our demand line, and the market says that, yeah, there's enough customers to fill up a school at $8,000 a seat, and the school owner is making money. They're making it what's called an economic profit, which means they're covering all their expenses, covering all the what-ifs, called opportunity costs, saying, well, if I wasn't doing this, I'd be doing something else, and I'd be earning that much money doing that. They cover that, and there's still money left over. Okay, you see, that's why they're going to attract competitors, because other people are going to say, oh, yeah, they're doing pretty well. They're making an above normal profit, which is a synonym for economic profit. And so additional supply comes in. How much additional supply comes in? Well, until the price by the increase in supply is driven. In my example, it's $7,400 until the price falls to the level to where an efficient operator of this kind of a school just barely covers all of their opportunity costs. Remember, opportunity costs are actual expenses as well as those what-ifs. If I wasn't doing this, I'd have a job doing that, and I cover that. So they're covering all of the expenses, explicit and implicit, that there are, just barely at $7,400 a school. You see, and that's why the shift stops at that point. See, this is how the market mechanism works. People, greedy people, I want to make a profit. Bingo, I have an idea. I bet I could sell this product for tons of money. And they build the business, which in this case, in our example, is a school. And sure enough, maybe not tons of money, but they make enough money to cover their expenses and their what-ifs, their opportunity costs, and still have some money left over above normal profit. That attracts competitor, because by above normal, by definition, means that others are out there making not as big a profit in whatever they're doing. Okay? And some of them are qualified to operate this type of a school. Okay? And so they enter the market until the price falls to the level that's just barely enough to cover normal operating expenses and have a normal profit, which means covering all the what-ifs, the implicit costs. All right, so we're up to the point where these schools are just private still. Okay, they're making ends meet on just strictly on tuition. What if the government comes along and says, you know, it's not fair that only people that have $8,000 or $7,400 can get into this school? Why don't we create an education savings account? Okay, or a tuition tax credit, or a tuition voucher. You're probably more familiar with that term than any of those others. All those are ways to make the subsidy that we provide to public school students portable, so that those who believe that the assigned public school isn't working that well for one or more of their children can take that child to a private school that they think is a better fit. Think of the tuition voucher like a discount coupon. Okay, and for the sake of our graph, we're going to use a $3,000 voucher. Okay, now normally the voucher would be bigger, right? Because the tuition is $7,400 or $8,000, and a $3,000 discount is nice, but it might not make that much of a difference. But we're going to stick to $3,000 because that way I won't have to have a graph that's this tall. My hand may be off the screen now for those out in video land. Okay, so here's our second graph, These two supply lines are the ones that were on the first graph. Okay, this is the original one based on the idea that, I bet a sports themed school would do well. The second one, S1, is after the copycat entrepreneurs jump in and drive the price down to $7,400, just barely enough. Oops, the $7,400 is here. The other graph was a bigger version of this first part, okay, to where they can just barely cover their expenses at $7,400. And then the government comes along and says, you know, we're going to provide a discount here so that more people can attend this. After all, they're paying tons of money to attend their public school. If they leave their public school, the government will save some money and will let them have some of that savings to attend an alternate school. Okay, so what happens as a result of providing that tuition voucher, basically a discount coupon? All right, we have our original demand in here. That was from the other graph, okay, exactly the same line that you saw before. And now we have our new demand, D1, that's the result of providing the discount coupon, which in this case we call a tuition voucher. Notice, after taking a moment to do so, that the new demand, okay, D1, is exactly $3,000 above the old demand. So every point for a given quantity on the new line is $3,000 above, right? Because you get this piece of paper that's free to you. It says, so if the quantity demanded at $7,400 would have been $400, now at $400, people would be willing to pay $10,400, okay? Right? Either way, they're paying $7,400 out of their pocket. Okay, so the demand shifts vertically upward by the amount of this discount coupon, the subsidy, okay, which in our example is $3,000. All right, now, okay, ignore S2 for the moment. I wanted to pre-draw this to have the lines be nice and straight. That hasn't happened yet, okay, but S1 is the current supply after the copycat entrepreneurs got in there at first and drove the price down to $7,400. Whoops, now the demand has increased big time. Okay, up by $3,000. So now at this original price, we've got a big shortage right here at $7,400. Okay, the demand has increased so that now the quantity demanded is all the way out here. Okay, at the $7,400 price. Okay, of course, it's only a $4,400 price to people out of their pocket because now they have this $3,000 discount coupon. Okay, so we have a big shortage at the $7,400 price minus the $3,000 discount, which means a $4,400 out-of-pocket cost. What happens with shortages? Prices increase. Okay, so in the short run meaning not enough time for new schools to be built, the price is going to increase to $9,000. Gasp. Okay, notice it doesn't go up by $3,000. $7,400 up to $9,000, $1,600. Okay, buyer and seller share the gain. Okay, so now at $9,000, there's no longer a shortage, no longer a surplus. Okay, $3,000 discount coupon means the out-of-pocket cost is $6,000. Okay, but as far as any of the schooling operators, potential and actual, are concerned, those that could run a school, deliver curriculum with a sports theme, they're saying, wow, they're selling those seats for $9,000. Wow, $8,000 were pretty attractive, right? Induced copycat entrepreneurship, big time market entry. Yeah, see, now that's why S2 comes into the bargain. Okay, it comes into the picture. Okay, because at $9,000, we're talking economic profit on steroids, right? $8,000 was profitable. Okay, $9,000 is going to be even more profitable. Okay, so more market entry, more increase in supply. Price is going to go back down to $7,400. Except now the quantity provided is going to be $1,400 rather than the original $200, which was the original school, rather than just after that $400, after the initial surge of market entry before the discount coupon / tuition voucher. Okay, so if a school is $200, we started with one school, now we have 7 schools. Okay, and notice one other thing about the tuition voucher. Yes, in the short run, the price increases, but in the long run, there's no increase in price. Now, when would there be an increase in price? 2 possibilities. One, market entry barriers. Right? This shift in supply assumes that it's easy to get into this market and start up a school that has this sort of a sports theme. What if it's hard to find teachers that'll teach with this sports theme? Okay, so that would drive up the price of teachers. See, and then there wouldn't be quite as much market entry, and the price wouldn't go back down to 7,400. Okay, and then the other possibility is that there's some, well, those are the two possibilities: a hindrance to get in, and then the possibility that costs may change as a result of the expansion of the market. Okay, so we're assuming that neither of those two things is the case, and so the price goes all the way back down to $7,400. Okay, that's important. You'll be at a cocktail party someday, and you'll be telling people about how subsidies in education to private schools would allow more families to find a good fit for one or more of their children for whom the assigned public school isn't working. And some people will gasp and say, well, that'll just drive up the price of private schools. Yes, initially. Yes, it will. The initial effect will do that, right, because of this large initial shortage. Okay, but unless there's market entry barriers, no, not in the long run. Okay, because the copycat entrepreneurs seeing above normal profit will jump in on this. But it's essential for any of this to work to have the price mechanism be unfettered. In other words, to have the price be free to do what it does. See, the price jumping up to 9,000 was the signal for all this additional market entry. If that had not been allowed, then we'd be just stuck with this big shortage. For those of you that study school systems at all, you might be familiar with charter schools. Nearly all of them have wait lists. Why? Because there's no co-payment possibility. Okay, so most of them, they demand at the price that they charge of zero, okay, versus the amount of money that they get them from the government and that they can solicit from charities isn't enough to supply the amount demanded at a price of zero. Okay, so charter public schools, nearly all of them have huge wait lists. Okay, and private schools, where there are vouchers, which isn't very many places, where the amount that you can co-pay is limited, those have shortages too. Okay, but as long as you're allowed to co-pay whatever the market will bear, gasp, yeah, I know, initially, right, you're going to soak people, right, the $6,000 co-payment here at this $9,000 price. But the co-payment will go down to $4,400 by the time it goes here. And a realistic voucher, given what most states spend on public schooling, is about $5,000 or $6,000. So that means if this was realistic in terms of these numbers, and the long-run price at which market entry stops is $7,400, and you had a $5,000 voucher, families would have to pay a $200 a month copayment. Okay, if that's a lot better fit for your child than the assigned public school, most families, I think, would find that. Plus, the charities would kick in probably for low-income families to pay that copayment. The process. All right, so this person with this idea or this discovery goes out and tries to find some money to start his or her school. And let's, for the sake of our example today, let's assume they find the money. And then they do their due diligence, which means they do all the investigation that there is on who might be willing to go to the school and pay how much to go there. And they decide to build a school that's going to teach things, subjects, math, reading, writing, through a sports theme. Okay, not athletics, but a sports that have a way to think about how it might be different if we did it the way the rest of the economy does it, namely through a price system. And let's just talk about how that basically works. And I have my graph up here already. You can ignore that for the moment. Maybe I should take my easel down so you won't be distracted by it. I'll put it back up in a minute. So what happens in this process is that somebody gets an idea. They discover, or they think they discover, that wow, if I did something a certain way, like provided a certain type of school, I bet a bunch of people would want to enroll in it, and I bet they would pay enough so that the school would be viable. Maybe they would pay enough even to have me make a fantastic profit. Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate you out there in video land. We're going to start off today talking about government versus market provision of a good or service. And we'll use an education system example. So we'll talk about a particular type of school and how that would be supplied and demanded under different conditions. Well, there are just two ways to decide what to produce, how to produce it, where to produce it, and who's going to get it. Of course, thankfully, the one way that's used the most often, probably mostly by default, is the price system. In other words, somebody decides to produce something, hope at night. It's an interesting video. It shows the northern half of Korea at night, basically black. In the southern part of Korea, which is a market economy where the price system decides what, how, and for whom, is lit up like a Christmas tree. It shows in one basic picture the difference between these two ways of providing things. And one of the reasons that we're going to use an education example for this today is because within our country and most countries, the schools, both public and private, are basically decided that what is going to be taught, how it's going to be taught, where it's going to be taught, and who's going to have access to it is basically decided mostly by a command system, by a central planning system. And we need to, hoping that customers will come to buy it, and the market will decide ultimately at what price those transactions will occur. And then if that price is high enough, then the business stays in business. If it's not low enough, then the person says, you know, I think I'm going to do something else for a living. And then the other way that pops up occasionally, disastrously, is provision by command. Usually that's called central planning. Some countries still do that. North Korea, Cuba, former Soviet Union, Red China when it was more red than it is now. And as you know from stories that you may have heard, you may want to Google one of these days, Korea